Oh, Jackson's calling me. Hello?
Hello?
Hi.
I just wanted to double check. Was it 2 salmon and avos and just 1 avocado?
No, 1 salmon and avocado, 1 tuna and avocado, and then 1 avocado.
Okay, cool. Gotcha. Thanks, babes.
Thank you.
Oh, see you later.
Bye. We're having sushi for dinner, so Jackson was just getting my sushi order. It's been over 2 months since I last uploaded an alcohol marker focused video, so I thought it was about time for another one. Today, I'm testing out some viral alcohol marker coloring techniques to see if they're worth the hype or if it's one of those situations where someone makes it look effortless online and then you try it and it turns into a hot mess. I know you've been there, I've been there, we've all been there. Now, when I say viral, I'm using that term pretty loosely. These are just techniques that I've seen pop up again and again in the coloring community, especially within the simple and bold coloring genre. And although that's not my usual style of coloring, I do think the techniques that people use in those pages are seriously impressive. So I'll not only be putting these alcohol marker techniques to the test, but I'll also be challenging myself to adapt them to the more detailed style of pages that I prefer and see if they work outside their usual coloring genre. So without further ado, let's jump into the video. So I've got 4 official alcohol marker coloring techniques that I'll be testing today and 1 unofficial one. That one doesn't actually involve alcohol markers, but it does show up quite a lot in people's completed pages, so I thought I'd chuck it in there as well. And I'll be testing all of these techniques out in this page here from Year of Witches by Usuku. At this point, I've colored in this book for all but 1 of my alcohol marker coloring tutorials, and that's simply because I'm obsessed with coloring in it with alcohol markers. It's just, ugh. Even though it's printed on Amazon paper, I just love using markers in this book. The first technique we'll be putting to the test is an absolute classic, and that is grass texture. Even though I don't use TikTok anymore, it was honestly my best resource for researching these techniques. And the grass tutorial I'm specifically testing comes from a TikTok by Coco Wyo. It has over 430,000 views, and so surely it must work, right? That said, the tutorial does use Copic markers, which I do not own. So I'll be trying to find similar colors from my ohuhu sets. And the only other possible complication I could foresee happening is that the blend with the ohuhu markers might not be as seamless because Copics are a higher quality product with better blending capabilities. But hey, we're here to experiment and to test and see if I can pull it off. Before diving into the grass coloring, I wanted to create some sort of background border because if I can avoid coloring all the way to the edge of the page, I absolutely will. So I decided to go with a border style I don't think I've ever done before, this sort of wavy abstract edge, almost like a subtle paint splatter vibe. And with that pencil sketched border in place, which you probably can't see on camera because it's so faint, I got started on the grass. Now, something to know about me is that when it comes to following art or coloring tutorials, I never follow them to a T. I usually watch the tutorial, get the general gist of the technique, and then adapt it to my own coloring style and preferences. And in this case, since I was using different supplies and color combos to what was shown in the tutorial, it was kind of necessary to tweak things to suit what I had on hand. So to break down what I did for this grass texture as simply as possible, first I laid down a base with my lightest shade, GY7, added shadows with my second darkest, GY5, blended those together using my mid-tone, GY4, deepened the shadows with the darkest shade, GY8, and then brought everything together with another layer of the lightest shade, Coloring with alcohol markers is such a good lesson in trusting the process because honestly, until the ink fully absorbs and dries, it can look like a chaotic mess. There were definitely moments during this video where I thought I'd completely messed everything up, but most of the time it works out fine. So overall, I think this grass texture turned out fairly well. I do wish the horizontal strokes had blended together a bit more smoothly, but I think the little tufts of grass added using the darkest marker and a pale yellow acrylic marker helped distract from that imperfection. So I'm giving this technique a big ol' thumbs up. So I knew I had to include some sort of a sky tutorial in this video because, like grass, it's one of those staple techniques to have in your coloring toolkit. I decided to go with clouds since they're so versatile. Whether it's an outdoor scene or just a little window in an indoor illustration, clouds can really elevate and provide context to a coloring page. So during my deep dive on TikTok, I came across this demonstration and oh my goodness, these clouds are gorgeous. The creator's username is not one I'm confident I can pronounce correctly, so I'll just put it on the screen. But seriously, I am in awe of the semi-realistic effect they've been able to create. This tutorial has over 187,000 views and deserves plenty more. I just had to try it out for myself, and luckily this one does use ohuhu markers. But of course, I don't own one of the exact shades that they used. So once again, I'll be improvising and substituting a similar shade from the ohuhu sets that I own, and hopefully I can still accomplish that dreamy cloud vibe. So to start with, I lightly sketched out some cloud shapes in the background as a guideline, though once again you probably can't see them on camera because the pencil was so faint. And instead of going with the classic blue gradient sky like in the TikTok tutorial, I decided to lean into a sunrise/sunset vibe just to give the page a subtle autumnal feel. We're not in autumn here in Australia, but this page just gives me fall energy, so orange and yellow it was. I have really come to realize that I'm definitely not a seasonal colorist. I'm a mood colorist, and autumn was the mood for this page. Now, when it comes to getting a smooth, streak-free gradient, especially over a large area like this background, the key is to work quickly in smaller sections when you can, and to keep the nib of the marker on the page as much as possible. I used to think you had to work in neat horizontal or vertical strokes with alcohol markers, but I've actually found that a circular motion is more effective in most cases. When I got to the clouds, the only color I didn't have was the light purple used in the TikTok tutorial, so I swapped it out for the closest shade I had, but I think it ended up being a little too dark. It still turned out fine, but I definitely would have preferred a lighter purple if I'd had one in my stash. I also felt like the uncolored bright white of the paper within the cloud shapes looked a little bit too stark against the warmer sky, so I colored over those with a super pale gray, and I think that was the right move. You'll see in the first cloud that I actually went over the entire thing with the gray, but it smooshed all the colors together a little bit too much. So for the rest of them, I only added gray to the highlight areas, which helped keep the shape and dimension of the clouds more intact. As for the little stars that were illustrated in the background, at first I had no idea what I was going to do with them, so I just colored over them and figured I'd decide later. And honestly, that's a tip I'd recommend you try in your own coloring. You don't have to have every detail planned out before starting a page. Obviously, I had somewhat of a plan for this one because I knew which techniques I wanted to test, but more often than not, I'll have a rough idea for 2 or 3 elements, and then I just make the rest of the decisions as I go based on how the page is coming together in the moment. Once I finished coloring the clouds, it was time to bring out my ohuhu acrylic markers, and this is where the cloud effect really came to life. As you can see, I added white acrylic to the tops and highlight points of each cloud, then dabbed it out with my finger, and that's what gave the clouds their soft, fluffy appearance. It's such a simple technique, but really effective, and I used pretty much the same exact method to create the smaller, distant clouds in the sky as well. Now, something I only just discovered is that you can actually color over acrylic with alcohol markers. It obviously looks a little different compared to coloring directly on the paper, but in this case, it worked really well for adding a bit of subtle shading to those background clouds. Overall, I am obsessed with how this technique turned out. There were definitely a few moments where I thought I'd ruined it, but it all came together in the end, and I'd highly recommend giving this one a try for yourself. Technique number 3 is one that is hugely popular in the simple and bold coloring genre, and that is the jelly/gummy effect. There are tons of tutorials out there on how to achieve this look, but for this video, I was on the hunt for something super specific because I wanted to apply the effect on the pumpkin illustrations on my page. I wanted to create jelly pumpkins. Eventually, I found this tutorial by Belly Bean Coloring. It doesn't have as many views as the other two techniques, just over 7,500, but I feel like it's still showcasing a very popular coloring trend, so it works for this video, right? I also felt like it was the perfect tutorial for my purposes because the jelly shapes in the demo are somewhat similar to the pumpkin illustrations on my page. Okay, it might be a little bit of a stretch, but we're gonna roll with it and see what I can do. So I decided to go with 2 different color combos for the pumpkins, and pretty quickly I realized just how tricky it was going to be to recreate the jelly effect on this page. I thought there'd be enough space to get a nice blend between all the colors, but yeah, that was definitely a misjudgment on my part. It wasn't terrible, but the effect just didn't translate all that well onto these smaller elements, but at least I gave it a shot, which is better than playing it safe and sticking to my comfort zone. And I think that is one of the reasons why I love coloring in this book so much. Since it's printed on standard printer paper, there's way less pressure to create a masterpiece. I'm not constantly stressed about making a mistake. Whereas with the more luxe, high-end coloring books in my collection, there's definitely that added pressure not to mess anything up. Because the paper's better, the book's more expensive, and it feels like it should be treated with more care. But I really try to shift out of that mindset when I can, because the freedom I feel when coloring in this book, the joy of just experimenting without stress, is exactly how I want to feel coloring in every book in my collection. At the end of the day, it's just lines and color on a page. The book isn't pressuring me to make a masterpiece. It's me that is doing that. Anyway, another classic Kira tangent over. This was actually the one tutorial in this video that I followed pretty much exactly, so I'll leave the link to that and all the other tutorials that I mention in the description below in case you want to follow along for yourself. Now, I definitely didn't pick the best color combo for the pink pumpkins here. The shadow shade I chose ended up being too red and a bit too dark for the rest of the palette. So next time I try this technique, I'll be a bit more intentional with my color choices and probably pick an element with a bit more surface area too, so the effect has more room to shine. But regardless, I think the pumpkins still turned out pretty cute. They may not scream jelly pumpkins, but the technique itself is solid and definitely worth trying. Now I'm gonna group techniques 4 and 5 together because I kind of have to color them at the same time in order for them to work on my coloring page. And those techniques are coloring wool and coloring ghosts and transparent objects. Creating a soft, fluffy texture is something you'll see a lot in the simple and bold coloring space, and I wanted to give it a go for the witch's sweater on this page in Year of Witches. So the tutorial I'm taking inspiration from is by Tiny Daisy Coloring. It has over 52,500 views, and yes, They are coloring a sheep, but I feel like I can take the same principles and apply it to a cardigan to give it that soft, fuzzy, cozy vibe. Now onto the bonus ghost/translucent technique. As I mentioned earlier, this technique doesn't technically involve alcohol markers, but it's an effect that is used a lot in heavy alcohol marker coloring work. So we're adding it to the video. However, I don't think I've ever gone as far as drawing in the background details behind the translucent object to really sell the effect. So I'll be doing that today, and the TikTok tutorial I'll be drawing reference from is a video by louise.colors, and it has over 25,000 views. So let's put these two final techniques to the test and see how they turn out. So part of the translucent technique involves drawing in whatever sits behind the transparent subject. Luckily, I didn't have anything too intricate to sketch here. Now, jumping back to the wool texture, this was another one where for a long time I thought I'd completely messed up with the color combo I chose. It just wasn't looking right. But then I introduced a fourth color later on, and that really helped tie everything together and smooth things over. It was also a bit tricky figuring out how to apply this fuzzy dotted effect to the shape of the sweater, especially since the original tutorial I was referencing used a sheep, which has a much simpler silhouette. My brain was kind of scrambling over where exactly to place the shadows using the dotted motion. It really shouldn't have been that different from the circular motion I usually use when coloring with pencils, but my mind just got in the way. And honestly, I hated how it was looking right up until the very end. So yeah, this is definitely one of those techniques where trusting the process is crucial. Now let's talk about the colorless blender. It's always a bit hit or miss for me. It tends to work really well with lighter marker shades like the base color I used here, but the moment I try to use it over a darker shade, the lightening effect just doesn't work as well, which I guess makes sense because of the higher pigment and saturation levels. So my suggestion is when using this technique, try to stick with a lighter, less saturated color palette so the blender effect has more impact. After that, I popped off camera to color in all the surrounding elements that needed to be finished before I could apply these final two techniques. And once I added those last acrylic marker details, that's when it finally all came together. This is exactly why I love incorporating acrylic marker details into all of my completed pages. They always give it that extra pop and polish that takes everything up a notch. That said, I did find it a little difficult deciding what direction the flicks should go in. I'm sure there are a few slightly rogue ones around the cuffs of the sleeves, but don't look too closely and it's totally fine. Okay, now I definitely ended up doing my own thing for the cat steam ghosts on this page. The TikTok tutorial I referenced had way more steps to bring their ghosts to life, but I took the shortcut approach. I didn't bother with using lighter alcohol marker shades inside the ghost shapes or anything like that. I just went straight in with the least opaque acrylic marker I own, an Artex brush acrylic marker, and did a few layers of that. Then I covered the line work with my Ohuhu white acrylic marker, did a few more layers, and bada bing, bada boom, ghost effect complete. So if you do want to go the extra mile and really push the translucent look, definitely check out the TikTok tutorial I mentioned earlier. But honestly, I think the shortcut method worked just as well, at least in my opinion. So there we have it, everyone. All the techniques tried and tested, and for the most part, I'd say this was a success, and I'd highly recommend you try all these techniques out for yourself. If I had to rank them from most favorite to least favorite, at the top is definitely going to be the cloud technique. I just I love that semi-realistic appearance on the page. Next would probably be the wool texture because I think it just looks adorable. Then in third place, I'd go with the ghost/transparent effect. It was super easy to do, but still gave a really cool and effective result. And finally, I'd probably tie the grass and jelly techniques as my least favorite. Not because they turned out badly, because I still really liked how they both came out on the page, but there's just a few things I would tweak next time I try them to make them work better for me. But anyway, if you made it to this part of the video, let me know what your favorite technique was that I showed in this video, and if there's any other alcohol marker techniques that I should try in the future. Until next time, happy coloring friends. Have a good day, have a good life, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!